My name is Linda Porter, and on our 20th wedding anniversary, in front of 80 people, under the soft glow of rented chandeliers at the community hall, my husband stood up, tapped his glass, and said the words that cracked my world open like cheap porcelain. 20 years is enough. I want someone younger. Move out of the apartment tomorrow. I remember the gasp before the silence. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, and I remember how I rose, took the microphone from his shaking hand, and said, "Thank you for 20 years of lessons." Then I placed it down and walked away, heels echoing like a drumbeat against that polished wood floor. I didn't cry, not yet. Not even when I reached the parking lot and the cold March air stung my face like truth. I sat in my old Buick, hands frozen on the steering wheel. It smelled like wintergreen gum and the perfume sample the cashier at Macy's handed me last week. Funny how tiny scents can hold you together when everything else falls apart. The community center's lights blurred in my rearview mirror as guests spilled out, whispering, unsure if they should chase me or stay inside and pretend this was simply a dramatic toast gone wrong. I drove home to our apartment on Maple Street, the one with the creaky floors and the radiator that hissed like a grumpy cat. My key felt heavier than usual. Inside, everything looked exactly the same, as if betrayal couldn't exist under warm lamplight and framed family photos. The lavender candle I lit that morning still flickered on the coffee table. I hung my coat, kicked off my heels, and sank onto the couch. That's when the tears finally came slow. At first, then like a broken dam. I buried my face in the throw pillow and let 20 years of marriage soak through the fabric. At 11:53 p.m., someone knocked. I didn't answer right away, but the knocking continued, gentle, patient. When I opened the door, there stood Mrs. Halverson from across the hall, wrapped in her old green sweater hair in rollers, her wrinkled face creased with concern. She said she heard what happened, that someone at the event texted her niece. News travels faster than wind in a building full of retirees. She said I could stay with her if Charles forced me out. I thanked her, hugged her, inhaled the scent of peppermint soap and comfort. She squeezed my hands and said, "You don't have to be loud to be strong, dear." Then she left, shuffling back across the hall like a small guardian angel. I spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of peppermint tea. The clock on the microwave blinked 12 heures like it always did, because we never reset it after last month's power outage. I stared at the grain in the wooden table, tracing each line with my fingertip, as if the patterns might spell out answers. 20 years, 2 decades, more than half of my adult life. I thought of all the anniversaries before this one, the ones with cheap flowers and burnt pot roast, and how I always believed small imperfections were proof of real love. Now, they just felt like warnings I ignored. At 1:17 a.m., the front door opened. Charles came in, flushed from embarrassment or liquor, I couldn't tell which. He smelled like cologne that wasn't his. He paused when he saw me. We stared at each other like strangers who speak the same language but no longer understand the words. He cleared his throat and said, "We'll talk tomorrow." His voice was flat, practical, like we were discussing a plumbing repair. Then he disappeared into the bedroom, shutting the door with quiet finality. I stayed at the table until my tea went cold. Morning arrived with a gray sky and the muffled sound of traffic below. I watched the city wake up from the living room window, watched people walk their dogs, scrape frost off windshields, carry coffee to their cars. Life outside didn't pause for heartbreak. For a moment, I wished it would just long enough for me to catch my breath. Charles emerged from the bedroom, wearing the same suit he had worn last night. Tie-loosened eyes, bloodshot. He poured himself coffee without asking if I wanted any. Then, he leaned against the counter and said as casually as asking about the weather, I meant what I said. I want out. I think it's best if you're gone by tomorrow. Something in me hardened. Not angry, just solid like wet clay, finally choosing a shape. I took a breath and said, the apartment is in my name. His eyes flickered. Surprise, maybe. Annoyance. He muttered something about discussing it later, then grabbed his coat and left. I heard the elevator doors clatter shut down the hall. I stayed still after he left. Stillness has a sound. When you've been shattered, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway radiator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I stood and walked to the bedroom. Sunlight spilled across the bedspread like nothing happened. I opened the closet and scanned the hangers. My clothes, his clothes, 1,000 shared memories sewn into every thread. I touched the sleeve of his gray sweater, the one I bought for our 15th anniversary. It felt like touching a ghost. I didn't pack. Not yet. Instead, I went to the bookshelf and pulled down the old shoebox where we kept our important papers. I found the deed to the apartment, my parents' names, on the notarization, the proof of inheritance. And something shifted inside me. Not rage, but a quiet alignment. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't leaving this home like an unwanted guest. That afternoon, I brewed another pot of tea. The steam rose into the air like hope. I sat down with a blank notebook and wrote in shaky cursive, "What comes next?" The words looked fragile on the page, but they were mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged to myself. I didn't leave the apartment that day. I didn't slam doors or throw plates or scream into the void like a younger version of me might have. At 60, heartbreak feels different, quieter, like a draft under the door sneaking into your bones. I spent the morning cleaning the kitchen, wiping crumbs from the counter, folding dish towels. There was something grounding about it, like I was telling the world, I am still here. By noon, I had changed out of last night's dress and into jeans and a soft blue sweater. I brushed my hair until it looked presentable. My wedding ring sat on my finger like a weight I hadn't noticed before. I slid it off and placed it gently in the drawer of my bedside table next to old birthday cards and ticket stubs from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Charles didn't return until mid-afternoon. He walked in with a brown paper bag of groceries, his favorites, not ours. He didn't look at me. At first, just moved around the kitchen with awkward familiarity. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered between rehearsed confidence and something else. Fear, maybe. "I talked to someone this morning," he said, setting a carton of almond milk on the counter. "A friend recommended a realtor. They said—" I cut him off, not with anger, but with something firmer. "The deed is in my name. This is my home." I kept my tone, even like reading a weather report. His jaw tightened. "That was 20 years ago, Linda. Things change." "Some things do," I said, "and some things don't." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. For a moment, I thought he might argue. The air felt heavy with unsaid words, but instead, he grabbed the keys from the hook and left again, the door slamming harder than necessary. The echo rattled the picture frames on the wall. I knew I couldn't depend on emotion alone. I needed facts I needed answers, so I went to the community legal clinic downtown. The waiting room smelled like old magazines and lemon cleaner. A young woman at the desk handed me forms with a sympathetic smile. I felt out of place, next to a teenage couple arguing in hushed tones, and an older man holding a stack of foreclosure notices. But when they called my name, I squared my shoulders and walked in. The attorney assigned to me was a woman in her 50s, named Margaret Hale. She had kind eyes and a practical bob haircut. She didn't sugarcoat anything, which I appreciated more than 100 platitudes. First, she said, flipping through the papers I brought, "You're not required to leave the home. Your husband announcing something at a party doesn't make it legally binding." I exhaled slowly. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. Second, she continued, "You'll want to pause any joint account withdrawals until we have a clearer picture of assets. I can file the request, but I'll need more information." I nodded, absorbing every word like a sponge. And, "What about the apartment? He's trying to sell it." She adjusted her glasses. "He can't sell what he doesn't own, even if he contributed financially over the years. The original ownership makes things more complicated. You have rights." Then, leaning forward, she added, "And rights are not disrespectful. They're boundaries." I left the clinic feeling steadier than I had in days. Not victorious, not vengeful, just anchored. I stopped by the credit union to ask about my accounts. The clerk, a kind young man with nervous hands, helped me print statements and suggested I speak to their financial advisor, Mr. Benson, who was available the next morning. I scheduled it before I lost the nerve. Back home, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the living room. I sat on the edge of the couch and let my eyes wander across the space. The framed photos, the knitted blankets, the potted fern in the corner pieces of a life that didn't evaporate just because Charles wanted someone younger. A knock startled me. I opened the door to find Michael Charles's son, from his first marriage, standing there with his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked like his father around the eyes, but his expression was softer. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had broken open the truth to myself just hours earlier. He didn't touch the tea I offered. "I heard what happened," he said. "Dad's been going through something. It's not an excuse. He stopped, searching for words. "He shouldn't have done that to you. Not like that." His voice cracked on the last sentence, and for a moment, I felt the sting of tears again. But I held them back. I had shed enough for both of us. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted, "but I'm not leaving." Michael nodded slowly. "Good. You shouldn't. That apartment means something. To you, to Grandpa, to what you built." The mention of my father hit me unexpectedly. His hands had poured foundation into that building. His sweat and years lived in those walls. Leaving would feel like erasing him, too. Before Michael left, he hugged me, hesitant at first, then tighter, like he was afraid I might break. It was the first time in a while I felt held by something other than exhaustion. That night, I made myself a grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple comfort food that tasted like childhood winters. I sat in front of the TV, but I wasn't watching. I was thinking about everything I had lost and everything I still had. My life wasn't over because my marriage was. It would just look different, smaller maybe, quieter, but mine. Later, as I crawled into bed, on the right side, the side I had always slept on, I looked at the empty space beside me without bitterness, just acceptance. I whispered into the dark, "I don't need to be loud, to be strong," echoing Mrs. Halverson's words. For the first time in a long time, sleep came easily. And when I woke the next morning, the sun seemed brighter, like it had chosen me. I woke before the alarm, before the traffic on Maple Street began its usual chorus of engines and brakes and morning deliveries. The sky outside the bedroom window was still pale blue, streaked with lavender, like a watercolor painting. I made coffee the way I always did, 2 scoops, a splash of cream, but it tasted different, like it belonged to a new life instead of the old one. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug cupped between my palms, feeling the quiet settle around me like a blanket. At 9 a.m., I walked to the credit union, my sensible flats tapping against the sidewalk. The morning air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. Inside, the teller recognized me and waved, and I realized how many years of my life had passed in this neighborhood without me truly seeing it. Routine can be its own kind of blindness. Mr. Benson, the financial advisor, was a tall man in his late 50s with a calm voice and a tie patterned with tiny sailboats. He invited me into his office, offered me water, and asked how he could help. I explained the situation, not every painful detail, just enough for him to understand the stakes. He nodded. "Divorce is never just emotional," he said gently. "It's practical. It takes planning." The word divorce made something twist inside me. I hadn't spoken it out loud yet, but here in this small office, smelling faintly of printer ink and lemon polish, it felt like the right word. Not an ending so much as an acknowledgement. He reviewed my accounts, made notes, and asked questions. I answered as best I could, hands resting in my lap to keep them from trembling. When he finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "You're in a better position than many people I see," he said. "But this won't be easy. It'll take patience and clarity." Patience. I had 20 years of practice. Clarity. That was new. When I left the credit union, I stopped by the small park on the corner, the one with the chipped green benches and the statue of a local war hero pigeons always perched on. I sat and watched children chase each other toward the monkey bars while their grandparents chatted on nearby benches. Life going on, life not pausing for anyone's heartbreak. A woman next to me, gray hair pinned back with barrettes, glanced over. "You look like someone who's carrying a lot," she said. There was no judgment in her voice, just recognition. I surprised myself by answering, "I'm figuring out where I stand." She smiled. "Good. That's how you start." Then she stood and left her cane, tapping rhythmically on the path. I walked home, slowly taking in storefronts I had passed 1,000 times without noticing. The bakery with the fading sign, the thrift store advertising half off on Wednesdays, the closed-down movie theater with its cracked marquee. When I reached my building, I paused before going in. The bricks looked the same as they always had, but I felt like I was seeing them for the first time. Inside the hallway was quiet, too quiet. When I opened the apartment door, Charles was standing in the living room, holding a cardboard box. His expression wasn't angry or apologetic, just unsettled, like a man who had started something he didn't know how to finish. "I thought I'd get a head start," he said. "On packing." "For yourself or for me?" I asked. He hesitated. That was answer enough. I walked past him, set my purse down, and took a steady breath. "This is my home," I said, voice calm. "I'm not leaving." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Linda, this doesn't have to be a war." I shook my head. "It won't be. But it also won't be what you want, just because you said it out loud. He looked down at the box, then back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw the man I married, the one who danced with me barefoot in our first kitchen, who held me when my father died, who laughed when I burned Thanksgiving dinner 3 years in a row. But memories aren't anchors. They're photographs. They can't keep you warm. Without another word, he set the box down and left. The door closed softly behind him this time, like even he could feel the shift. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just breathed. Sometimes that's what survival looks like. By late afternoon, I found myself organizing the apartment, not packing to leave, but curating what would stay. I took down certain photos from the living room wall, the ones that felt like artifacts of someone else's story. I placed them in a drawer. I left up the picture of my parents on their porch in Indiana, my mother, in her Sunday dress, my father, with his hand resting proudly on the railing he built. That photo belonged here. They built this place in a way, through their work, their sacrifice, their belief that I deserved stability. The doorbell rang as I was rearranging the bookshelf. I opened it to find the younger woman, her standing there, awkward and uncertain. She couldn't have been more than 35. Her lipstick was smudged, and she clutched her purse like a shield. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know. He told me you two were done. A long time ago." I believed her. I didn't want to, but I did. Ignorance isn't innocence, but it isn't guilt either. "He made it official in front of 80 people, I replied, a tired attempt at humor. She winced. I left him. I didn't sign up to hurt someone like that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, two women linked by a decision neither of us made. "Thank you for telling me," I said, finally. And I meant it. She nodded, turned, and walked away. Her heels clicked down the hallway until the sound faded. That evening, I sat on the couch with the shoebox of documents beside me. I sifted through them, slowly, deeds, bank statements, receipts, certificates, proof of a life built piece by piece, proof of what was mine, proof that I wasn't powerless. The sun set outside, painting the walls amber. I turned on the lamp beside me, the same lamp we bought at a garage sale 15 years ago. The room glowed soft and warm, like it was choosing me back. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Strength doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it signs paperwork." I closed the notebook and smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because everything was finally beginning. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the frantic insomnia of the first evening. It was something steadier, like my mind was sorting files in the background while my body rested. When morning finally came, I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the sunrise spill over the neighboring rooftops. I realized I didn't feel afraid to face the day. That was new. I made oatmeal and added cinnamon like my mother used to. The smell carried me back to childhood, to mornings before school, when she'd whisper, "You don't have to roar to be heard, honey. Just know who you are." For years, I mistook silence for weakness. Now I understood it could be something else entirely. Charles didn't come home the night before, and I didn't wonder where he was. The space beside his coffee mug on the counter felt like a missing tooth, noticeable, but not painful anymore. I didn't fill the space. I just let it be. When I left the apartment, the hallway was quiet. I passed Mrs. Halverson's door and heard the faint sound of her television. I almost knocked, but something in me said I needed to do this day alone. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button with a certainty that surprised me. I walked to the library, not as a patron escaping her home or her heartbreak, but as someone returning to a place that had always been hers. The glass door stuck like it always did, and the familiar weight of it grounded me. Inside, the scent of old books and floor polish wrapped around me like a hug. The head librarian, Janet, waved me over. She's in her late 60s, with silver hair and a voice that could calm a tornado. I heard she said softly. Of course she had. News traveled here like wind in wheat fields. I'm staying, I said, and she nodded, understanding more than the words themselves. She handed me a stack of flyers for the outreach program, the one that delivered books to seniors who couldn't leave their homes. I put them in my tote bag and felt a small spark of purpose. By noon, I was in the community center's basement, helping box donated clothing for the winter drive. The radio played soft country music, and someone brewed coffee that tasted like burnt caramel. I didn't talk much. I didn't need to. My hands worked steadily, folding sweaters, stacking coats, sorting scarves. At one point, Darla, a lively woman with bright scarves and louder earrings, leaned close and whispered, "Word is your husband made a fool of himself in front of half the town." I stiffened, bracing for pity or judgment. Instead, she added, "Good. Maybe he'll realize the bargain he walked away from." It was the closest anyone had come to choosing my side without conditions. I smiled, a genuine one, and kept folding. That afternoon, I attended a workshop. The center was offering financial confidence after 60. The room was filled with people who looked like me, men and women, with stories etched into their faces, people who had lost something or someone and were trying to rebuild. The facilitator, a retired accountant, talked about Social Security benefits, budgeting on a single income, avoiding scams, practical things, life things. I took notes like my future depended on it, because maybe it did. When I returned home later, groceries in one hand and my tote bag in the other, I opened the door to find Charles sitting at the dining table. He wore a navy sweater I hadn't seen in years. He looked older than he had a week ago. "We need to talk," he said. I set the groceries down and nodded, but didn't sit. He cleared his throat. I was cruel. What I said, how I said it. I shouldn't have done that. I was scared and stupid. There was a time I would have rushed to reassure him, to patch the hole in his heart, even as mine bled dry. But that time was gone. "I'm not leaving," I said. He ran his hands through his hair. "I know. I talked to a lawyer. They told me the same thing your clinic probably did. I don't want this to get ugly." "It doesn't have to," I replied, "but it won't go the way you imagined." His eyes lifted to mine, watery around the edges. "Is there a chance we could fix this?" My heart twisted, not from longing, but from the ghost of it. "I don't know," I said softly, "but I know we can't fix anything until we separate what was ours from what is mine." He nodded like he already expected the answer. "I packed some things," he said, motioning to a small suitcase by the door. "I'll stay with Michael for a while. We can talk again when we've both figured out how to be people outside of this." He gestured around the apartment like it was a museum of a marriage. He stood and walked past me, pausing at the door. "You deserved better than how I treated you." For the first time since that night, his words didn't crack anything inside me. They stitched. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it. The apartment hummed around me with the quiet familiarity of home. The radiator hissed. The fridge clicked on. Life continuing. I walked to the closet and pulled out the box where I kept my old volunteer badges, church directories, and the brochure from the cooking class I always meant to take, but never did. I added a new item to the box, the paperwork from the legal clinic, a symbol of the life I was building. Later, I brewed tea and carried my mug to the balcony. The city stretched below me. Cars, shops, people, living their own stories. The wind was cool, brushing against my cheeks like a promise. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I wasn't someone's wife first. Maybe I'd repaint the bedroom. Maybe I'd plant herbs on the windowsill. Maybe I'd join the Thursday knitting group, even though I could only knit crooked scarves. It didn't matter what the future looked like. It mattered that it was mine. Behind me, the apartment was quiet, but not empty. It was full of possibilities. I whispered into the wind, "I don't need to be loud to be heard." The wind carried it away, but I didn't need it back. The next morning, the apartment felt bigger. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the tension had finally stepped out with Charles and closed the door behind him. I walked through each room, slowly touching objects like a curator in her own museum, the chipped ceramic bowl from the state fair, the quilt my mother sewed the year before she passed the bookshelf, full of novels I always meant to read twice. None of it had changed, but I had. I baked a batch of blueberry muffins the way I used to when Michael was little and would visit on weekends. The smell filled the apartment, warm and bright, like it was reclaiming the air. I set aside a few on a plate for Mrs. Halverson. Then I sat down at the table with my planner and opened it to a blank page. The header read, "This week." For the first time in years, the space beneath felt like an invitation instead of a burden. At 10 o'clock, I headed to the community center for a volunteer meeting. The director, Bethany, greeted me with a hug that smelled like vanilla lotion. She handed me a stack of papers and whispered, "Heard about the anniversary. People talk." She pulled back and added, "People also admire you." Then she winked and returned to the podium before I could respond. The meeting was about a new outreach program, monthly brunches for older adults who felt isolated. They needed volunteers to plan menus, make calls, arrange transportation. I raised my hand before I could think about it too long. Bethany smiled, like she had been waiting for that moment. I felt something click into place, purpose sliding into an empty spot where fear used to live. Later, I stopped by the grocery store. In the cereal aisle, I ran into Karen from church, the kind of woman who always spoke in half-truth compliments. "Oh, Linda," she said, voice bright with performative concern. "I heard about your situation. You must be devastated." I looked her in the eye and replied, "I'm building a new life, one stack of pancakes and legal document at a time." I didn't raise my voice, didn't lean in. I just let the words sit. Karen blinked, unsure how to respond, then muttered something about keeping me in her prayers. I thanked her, and I meant it. Not all kindness comes perfectly wrapped. Outside, I sat on the bench with my groceries and watched a group of teenagers skateboard in the parking lot. Their laughter carried across the pavement, rough around the edges, but honest. I realized I hadn't heard myself laugh like that in years. Maybe I missed it. When I got home, a small group was waiting outside the building. 3 older women from our church choir and 2 neighbors. They held a casserole, a vase of flowers, and a card that read, "Thinking of you." I recognized every face, but the expressions were different. No pity, just solidarity. "We're not here to gossip," one of them said. before I could speak. "We're here because you're family." We sat in the apartment, eating the casserole chicken noodles. Cream sauce, the universal language of comfort. They asked gentle questions, but didn't pry. They offered help, but didn't insist. When they left, the apartment felt full in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. That evening, the phone rang. It was the number for the local radio station. I recognized the voice of the host, Ruth, who had met me at the library months ago. She was organizing a segment on community rebuilding and asked if I would speak about the outreach program. My throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm the right person," I said. "You're exactly the right person," she replied. "Sometimes the right person is just the one brave enough to say yes." I didn't say yes, not yet, but I didn't say no either. Before bed, I checked the building mailboxes, like I always did. Tucked in mine was an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "You taught me what grace looks like. M." Michael's handwriting. I stared at the words until they blurred, not because I was crying, but because my heart was reading them slower than my eyes. I tucked the note into the pocket of my planner. The next morning, I attended the brunch planning meeting. The room was full of voices and clattering dishes and that nervous energy that comes before trying something new. Bethany handed me a clipboard and said, "You'll handle outreach. You're good with people." I almost laughed at the irony. I spent the afternoon making phone calls from a quiet desk by the window. Most went to voicemail. A few answered. One woman cried. One man asked if we'd serve decaf. Another told me he hadn't left his apartment in 6 months. I scheduled transportation for him. When I hung up, I sat back and breathed. I was building something. Not revenge, not victory, just a life. At dusk, I took the leftover muffins to the rooftop patio of the building. I sat on a lawn chair with peeling paint and looked out over the street, glowing with lamplight and early spring blossoms. That's when I felt it eyes on me. I turned and saw Charles standing at the doorway to the terrace. He held nothing. No suitcase, no excuses. "I heard you're running half the community center now," he said. I snorted softly. "I'm just helping." "Linda," he hesitated. "Everyone's talking. They're proud of you." I didn't respond. He stepped closer, hands shoved in his pockets, like a boy caught doing something wrong. "I used to think the loudest person in the room was the strongest," he said. "Turns out I was just loud." I held the muffins out. Blueberry. He blinked, then took one. We stood in silence, watching the cars go by like starlight on wheels. He finally said, "You don't have to forgive me." "I know," I replied, "but I might anyway. For me." He nodded, swallowed hard, turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, I said, "Charles." He looked back. "You can't fix what happened at that microphone, but you can choose what comes next." He nodded again, slower this time, like the words settled somewhere they hadn't reached before. Then he left. I stayed. I watched the city breathe, and for the first time, I felt like I was breathing with it, at my own pace, in my own rhythm. I whispered into the air, "This is my life now." And it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. I didn't realize how quickly months could pass when I wasn't waiting for someone to choose me. Spring turned into summer, and my apartment warmed with sunlight that felt like it belonged here, as if forgiveness came through the windows each morning. I started buying fresh flowers on Fridays. Tulips mostly. They made the place smell like hope. By June, the brunch program at the community center was running smoothly. We served pancakes and scrambled eggs on mismatched plates, and no one complained. Our volunteers delivered meals to homebound seniors, and I started recognizing voices on the phone before they introduced themselves. I built routines. I built friendships. I built myself. One day, Bethany stopped me in the hallway, fanning herself with a clipboard. "Linda," she said, "you won't believe this. We've been nominated for a small grant from the Women's Resilience Foundation. They want you to speak at their luncheon next month." My heart stuttered. Me. She laughed. "Yes, you. The woman who keeps half this place from falling apart." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I just folded the idea carefully and placed it somewhere in my mind, like a dress I wasn't sure I was ready to wear. That evening, I returned home to find an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a folded letter, no signature at the bottom, but I knew the handwriting. Charles. "Linda, I've been thinking about the life we built, the ways I failed to honor it. I'm not asking for us to be what we were. I'm asking if we can learn to be what we are now. If you're willing, I'd like to buy you dinner, not to win you back, just to apologize properly. See." I read it twice. Then I placed it gently in the drawer with my wedding ring, not as a promise, but as a chapter marker. Days passed. I worked. I volunteered. I learned how to cook salmon without overcooking it. I let the silence of my apartment become comfortable like an old sweater. And every time I thought of the luncheon, something fluttered in my chest. Not fear, not pride, but anticipation. The morning of the event arrived in August. I wore a navy dress with pockets and a pair of pearl earrings my mother left me. In the mirror, I looked like someone who had survived something. Not perfectly, not triumphantly, just truthfully. The luncheon was held at a hotel ballroom with soft lighting and white tablecloths. Women filled the room, some in tailored suits, others in cardigans and comfortable shoes. Real women, women with history. I found my seat and rehearsed the speech in my mind, short, simple. I would tell the story of our outreach program. I would thank the foundation. I would not tell them about the microphone at my anniversary dinner. Not yet. But when Ruth, the radio host, introduced me, she said something unexpected. "Please welcome a woman whose quiet strength has inspired countless others." Countless, I hadn't realized my story had traveled that far. I walked to the stage, the microphone waiting like a memory. My hands trembled. I steadied them on the podium. The room hushed. I took a breath and let my heart speak. On my 20th wedding anniversary, I began voice steady. My husband announced to a room full of people that he wanted someone younger, that I should move out. I could have shouted. I could have begged. Instead, I walked away. A ripple moved through the audience, not shock, but recognition, like they had been there too in their own versions of that moment. In the weeks that followed, I learned something. When the ground falls from beneath you, you can build a new one brick at a time, through community, through work, through faith in yourself you didn't know you had. I paused, felt the weight of the room not heavy, but held. I didn't seek revenge to destroy him. I sought justice to rebuild me. My revenge was dignity, documentation, boundaries, and the quiet decision to stay in the home I inherited, rather than leave the one I had earned. A few women nodded. One dabbed her eyes. The outreach program wasn't born from inspiration. I continued. It was born from loneliness, mine. And then I learned loneliness is the seed of connection if you let it bloom. When I finished, applause rose like a tide, not thunderous, not wild, steady, strong, like rain that knows how to heal the earth. Afterward, women approached me. They shared pieces of their own stories, broken engagements, financial betrayals, the loneliness of widowhood. I listened, not as a survivor who had climbed to safety, but as someone still learning to live in the light. As the event ended, I felt a presence behind me. I turned. Charles stood there, hands in his pockets, tie slightly askew. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the space he took up in my life. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "You always were. I just didn't see it." "I think you did," I said. "You just didn't know what to do with it." He swallowed hard. "I meant what I wrote. I'm not asking for us to go backwards. I'm asking if you'd let me walk with you forward as a friend. Maybe someday something more. But only if you want that. Only if it's good for you." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who broke me. I saw the man who failed, and the man who might still be capable of growth. "Friendship," I said softly. "Let's start there." We walked out together, not side by side, but not far apart, just enough space to grow. That evening, I returned home and opened the balcony door. The sky was streaked pink and gold sunset, wearing hope like jewelry. I pulled my planner from my bag and wrote on a fresh page. Next, repaint the bedroom. Plant rosemary. Say yes to dinner with friends. Say no to apologizing for existing. Learn how to laugh again. The last line made me pause. Then I added, "And when I laugh, let it be loud." Because silence had served me, but now perhaps there was room for joy too. I didn't expect the final chapter of this story to feel soft. I thought it would feel like a slammed door, or a triumphant march, or some grand cinematic ending. Instead, it felt like a warm cup of tea between my palms and the smell of fresh paint drifting from the bedroom down the hall. Fall settled over the city slowly. Leaves gathered in the corners of Maple Street, crisp and gold. Shops placed pumpkins in their windows. The community center started planning holiday baskets, and I spent Wednesday afternoons wrapping gifts in newspaper and twine. Life didn't speed up or slow down, it just moved, and I moved with it. On a rainy Saturday morning, I found myself in the thrift store on Jefferson Avenue. I was looking for a new lamp for the bedroom. The old one felt like part of a life I had outgrown. As I browsed, a woman with silver braids tapped me on the shoulder. "Aren't you the lady who spoke at that luncheon?" she asked, eyes bright. "I am," I answered. It still felt strange to say. She smiled. "Your words helped my sister. She finally left the house after months. Came to Sunday service for the first time in a year. She said she wanted to see what starting again looked like." I didn't know what to say, so I took her hand and squeezed it. Sometimes words aren't the gift presence is. Later that week, I decided to invite a few people over for dinner. Not a party, just a table full of connection. I made roast chicken with lemon and thyme, mashed potatoes with too much butter, and a cherry pie from the bakery down the street. Mrs. Halverson came wearing her best sweater. Michael stopped by with a bouquet of sunflowers. Bethany brought a loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. The apartment buzzed with voices, laughter, the clinking of glasses. It sounded like belonging. At one point, I excused myself to fetch more plates from the cabinet. When I returned, Charles was standing just inside the doorway, invited but cautious. He held a container of store-bought cookies in his hands, like a peace offering. "I didn't bake them," he said, awkward. "Figured honesty was better than pretending." I smiled. Honesty is enough. He joined the group, and I watched as he apologized to Mrs. Halverson for the noise complaints he made years ago to Michael, for expecting him to choose sides to Bethany, for not donating to the community center when she asked last year. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. The dinner ended early. We're all at the age where late nights mean stiff joints and cranky mornings. Charles stayed behind as the others filtered out. "Your home looks different," he said, glancing around. "I see it differently," I replied. "Maybe that's the bigger change." He nodded. "I'm learning. Slowly. Clumsily." "Me too." Then, he asked gently, "Do you think, someday, there's a version of us that could be more than this, if we continue to heal?" I looked at him for a long moment. In his eyes, I didn't see entitlement or expectation. I saw effort. I saw a man trying to be better than the man who held the microphone that night. Maybe I said, but only if we continue as two whole people, not as halves trying to make a whole. The old me would have apologized for that. The new me did not. He smiled, small grateful, and left. As the door closed, I stood in the center of my living room, letting the quiet settle around me. Not the suffocating quiet of abandonment, the sacred quiet of choice. The next morning, I attended the community center's first autumn brunch of the season. The room was full wheelchairs and walkers' canes and cardigans' hands holding hands. Someone had placed orange leaves in mason jars as centerpieces. It looked like a poem. Bethany greeted everyone, then asked me to speak. I hadn't planned anything, but I stood anyway, letting my heart guide my mouth. We're all rebuilding something I began. A life, a routine, a belief in ourselves. Some of us are rebuilding after loss. Some after betrayal. Some after years of forgetting who we are. There's no shame in any of it. There's no expiration date on becoming new. Dozens of heads, nodded eyes, glistening in the morning light. Justice, I said, doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes, justice is simply choosing yourself, signing your own name on a life you were taught to shrink for someone else. Revenge can be quiet. It can look like planting herbs in your window, like learning how to laugh again, like forgiving not to forget, but to move forward. I took a breath. And healing isn't loud, I finished. It's steady. It's consistent. It's the whisper you tell yourself in the mirror. You are allowed to exist fully. When I sat down, someone squeezed my hand. Another person whispered, "Thank you." I felt it all. Later that day, back home, I made a cup of tea and stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like leaves and beginnings. I watched a couple below share a red umbrella, their steps slow easy. I leaned against the railing and spoke softly the way one speaks to their own soul. "If you're listening to this," I said, because I imagined the listener, the woman or man on the other side of this story, I hope you know it's not too late. I hope you know that what broke you doesn't get the last word. You do. I hope you choose gentleness. And if you can't be gentle, yet choose consistency, just show up for yourself over and over until you believe you're worth the effort. I lifted my mug in a small toast to the sky. And if you ever feel alone, come sit with us. There's always a seat at the table. I let the moment linger. The breeze brushed past me, cool and kind. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, I added, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And if this story softened something in you, if it made you feel less alone, I would be honored if you shared it, or subscribed, or simply came back for another cup of tea. Maybe next time we can laugh together." I smiled,